Hello everybody and welcome to Igor's Japanese Language Dojo, the ultimate place to study and analyze Japanese grammar. Without episode today, we will finish off the entire Japanese conditional series, a series into which I have poured a lot of my time and effort to make them, let's say, as comprehensive as they can be and as easy to understand as they can be. I'm really happy that I embarked on this journey in which I covered almost every detail, or at least I think to best of my knowledge that I have managed to cover every bit and every characteristic that is most important to the Japanese conditionals, and all of these videos on my channel that are dedicated to them are meant to help you in your, let's say, mastery of the Japanese conditional forms, because they are very important, and unlike in English they have a variety of usages. And if you have been with me from the very beginning of this series, you can see that there is also quite a number of situations where they overlap. So this, let's say, episode will be our crowning achievement of the entire conditional series, and it will be a more, let's say, rambly of the sort. It will be quite different from my standard fare where every episode is scripted, it follows a certain structure, and this episode will not. This episode will be, however, dedicated to providing you with a brief overview, a capitalization on everything that we have learned up to this point, and maybe it will also give you some of the information that you might have forgotten or that you haven't been able to glean from the original videos. However, if you're interested in a particular conditional rather than an overview that this episode will be dedicated to, I will leave all the links to all of the videos from my conditional series in the description box below, in case you have really just a specific need to see how one conditional works and not all of them. However, if you are really just looking for a reminder, for a brief overview, then I suggest that you stick around for this episode, because this episode is precisely that, just a quick reference with some additional material that I have been, let's say, unable to cover at the time, or that I haven't been able to find enough information on to properly convey it and properly integrate it in my videos. So without further ado, let's get cracking and let's start the final episode of my conditional series. So yeah, let's start first with a quick reference chart for the Japanese conditionals that we have covered in the original videos. In this table here, you can find all four of them: ba, tara, to, and nara. And like I have said in the previous section, in case you're interested only in a particular conditional, you should really check out the video that I have dedicated to it, and you will find a link to those videos in the description box below. But here you will find, here in the first column, the conditionals lined up. They are ba, tara, to, and nara. After that, you will find the first and second meaning. Now, I would like to clarify these two sections here, because the first meaning, under that I simply, let's say, presume that it is the meaning that is closest to the essence of the Japanese conditional, when also accounted for all the special characteristics of that conditional and the constructs that appears to. So for example, here when I have written that the primary meaning, or the first meaning, of the tara conditional is when, is simply to state that tara has a whole lot more in connection with the temporal stuff and the time the relationships between actions than any other conditional, and that is why I have, let's say, put it as when primary, but of course you can find it translated as if and used as if. So let's say that this first column of first meanings is something that is approximating to the description of the very essence of the conditional itself, while the second meaning is just supplementary. So for example, also the ba conditional here, you can see that its primary meaning is if and secondary meaning is when, because ba is always, by far and large to be more precise, translated into if, and it finds itself, let's say, in 99% cases translated into if, and its usage reflects that. So let's get to the descriptions of all of these conditionals one by one. As you can see here, the first conditional is ba, and its primary meaning is if, and the secondary meaning is when. So let's say that the core of the ba itself, the meaning of if, is far more appropriate than the meaning of when, even though both can be found. And the most important thing for ba that you should remember that it is a hypothetical conditional, meaning that there is a whole lot more focus on the relationship between the condition and the result than there is on the time reference or on a temporal relationship between the two. It is simply saying that if the conditional clause that is marked with ba happens, then the result will happen. Now you can also see it here that is often used for expressing habits, general truths, hypothetical situations, and results. I have covered all of these in my video that deals exclusively with ba, so if you need a refresher on them, I suggest that you really branch out and see that video. And also another thing that I have, let's say, discovered in the meantime and that I deemed of worthy of mentioning here is that ba has a slightly, let's say, formal ring to it and is often found in writing. So this can also help you when you want to decide whether to use ba or tara or to, really depending on the context. So yes, in short, I think that these here characteristics are the most, let's say, descriptive of ba and that they portray what ba really is. It is just a hypothetical conditional, often used for habits, general truths, hypothetical situations, and results, and that it also has a formal, let's say, ring to it. Now, the second conditional here is Tara, and this Tara conditional is really flexible and is considered to be a pure temporal conditional because it really has a very strong reliance on the time sequence, and it likes to stress a whole lot more than ba the temporal relationship that exists between two actions. And that is why you can often find it used for suggestions, references, requests, and especially in what should I do question types. And also, unlike ba, it has a colloquial ring most of the time. So yeah, I would like to say that Tara here, out of all conditionals here listed, is really the most flexible one because it can cover almost all of the bases that you need when you have an informal, a casual conversation, and Tara can be really used for a lot of things. It can really just give you, let's say, pure conditions. You can make suggestions, you can refer to various things, stuff, books, persons, whatever you need, and that is why I find Tara to be impossibly, simply just shockingly versatile. And I suggest using Tara, especially if you're a beginner, that you should always first learn Tara and only after that every other conditional, simply because it is very versatile and can help you a lot. Also, there are a whole lot of, let's say, side constructions that use Tara in one way or another, such as Tara inoni, for example, to express a form of regret or something like that in that vein. So Tara will allow you to learn a lot more, let's say, flexible and useful constructs when you master it. So as far as recommendations go on which conditional to learn first, I think that Tara would be the best place to begin simply because it is really flexible, it's easy to learn how to build and how to make. And this brings us to the to conditional here. He is the third in our table. And you can see here that to, unlike ba and tara, let's say it's not precisely defined as a hypothetical or temporal conditional because in my opinion it has both of those characteristics. Because to, let's say if we want to really narrow it down, it emphasizes the link between the condition and the result, and that is why we are using it for habits, giving direction, describing natural phenomena, machine operation, unexpected events, and or discoveries. And you can see here that the first and primary meaning is when, simply because to is practically saying that as soon as this condition happens, the result will happen inevitably and almost instantaneously. So when you want really to, let's say, punch up the highlight of that link that exists between the two, or when you are saying something that is in the vein of the mentioned things, here to is really good to use. And to is also one of the more frequent conditionals in everyday Japanese alongside tara because it is really used for giving directions, and this is especially useful if you find yourself in Japan or if you are looking for directions in Japan, and someone native, if he's giving you directions, he will often use to when he says you need to, when you, for example, turn left, or when you go up the street or something like that. So to is also very frequent, and I suggest also learning that after Tara if you are a beginner. And I like to remember to. Now, this is just my personal mode preference, so your can be different, but I like to remember to as being used for sentences where there is a natural or a logical connection that is unbreakable between the condition and the result. So I like to use it then because it is really simple. And if you remember the examples that we have used in the original video, for example, when you heat up ice, you will get water. So this is something that is true in nature. That is something that is absolutely true, and that will happen as soon as you heat up the ice. So you can use to in that vein. I like to remember the usage of to by using that example. Of course, that can be something, let's say, different for you, or maybe you have some other example that you use to remember to easily. Also, I would like here to mention, just because we are talking about to, that this machine operation description is also very useful because machines are created to operate in a more or less, let's say, predetermined fashion. And also when you are, for example, talking about an elevator, the example that we have analyzed, we are simply saying that when you press a certain button, the doors will open or close. So here to is also used because those actions occur inevitably. And here is that thing that we have said, that there is a strong link, and that is why to here is used. So when it comes to the temporal or hypothetical conditions, to is something that really just saying what will happen inevitably and almost instantaneously if a certain condition is fulfilled. So I would call it as conditional in its purest sense, simply because it is giving us a condition and saying what will happen if that condition is met. So that's my opinion of to. And finally, we have Nara here. Now, Nara is the contextual conditional, and unlike the previous conditionals, it is exclusively used in the first meaning, and that is if. It has no temporal relationship whatsoever. Now, the Nara conditional is somewhat unique out of all of these four conditionals because the condition itself is essentially an assumption of the speaker based on his, let's say, observance of the situation. And like you have seen in our original video, we are assuming certain interests, for example, of our listener here to be true, and we are making our own suggestions, propositions based upon them. So you can see that Nara is frequently used for requests, judgments, suggestions, evaluations, and attitude expression based on the condition. And the condition, once again, is just your assumption. So you're acting here on assumptions, on hunches. So yes, that is, let's say, the most appropriate way that you can define Nara. And I find it also very easy to remember if you just recall the most, let's say, precise translation of if it is the case then, or if you are already, if it's given that you are doing something. So in that vein, when you already have, let's say, established an assumption, and after that the speaker is giving his own personal evaluation of, let's say, the condition, or the result, to be more precise here, than anything else. So yes, I would still like to call Nara the contextual conditional, and in my humble opinion, it is really the easiest one to remember out of these four, simply because it has, let's say, the most established rules, and really when it comes to overlapping, it has very little in common with the rest of the Japanese conditionals. So I think that Nara is somewhat unique, unlike all of the others that you can see here and the others that we have covered. Now, my opinions here, I will now state a series of my own personal, let's say, conclusions on the Japanese conditional, is that the ba conditional here is perhaps the, let's say, most difficult one to grasp and use consistently, simply because it can be replaced by Tara in a very significant number of cases. And I think that ba is definitely the most difficult one to master and to use correctly. On the other hand, I think that Tara, simply because of its versatility and its frequency, is very easy to understand, or at least very easy to grasp the essential context, and through practice you can get to the very top of it, unlike Ba, because I think that with Ba there is a whole lot more to that meta knowledge, as I like to call it, that you need to know in order to proceed. Now that is mostly connected with the types of conditions that I have talked in the intro video, and that is, I mean, the most difficult usage of Ba. There's also, let's say, a little bit of overlap between Ba and To when talking about certain habits, or let's say conditions, but I think that I have explained that in the videos, in the original videos, pretty much in extraneous detail. So for now, I would just say that To here indicates a certain immediacy to the resolution of the or conditional to the result part of the conditional sentence, unlike Ba. But if you really need a detailed explanation, I suggest that you look up the videos that deal with Ba and To, because I talked rather extensively about both conditionals here. So yes, that's my opinion more or less, because in terms of difficulty, I would rank Ba here as the most difficult one. After that, I would put Tara on it, simply due its number of various uses that you can find that Tara covers. After that, To, and finally Nara being the easiest one of them all, simply because Nara depends a lot on the context, and that is something that is very essential to it, and that is precisely why it is called the contextual conditional. So if you are someone who is already starting, or has started learning Japanese conditionals on your own, I suggest that you start with Tara, simply because it has a lot of functions and you can start using it very early. Then you should proceed to Nara to, let's say, further expand, and only after that to tackle with Ba and To. Now, of course, this can differ for every person, because not everyone studies the same way, and difficulty is a subjective thing. So maybe someone will find the conditional To or Nara to be the most difficult one, but like I have said, this is just my subjective assumption, and let's say I'm talking in Nara form most of the time now in this section here, because I'm making my own personal assumptions based on the things that I have covered in my videos that are connected to the entire topic of the Japanese conditionals. The last thing I want to cover in this video is the usage of the adverb moshi as the introduction to your conditional sentences. And this is the most prevalent purpose of moshi, and the most important one for all beginners to understand, and that is simply to add moshi at the beginning of your sentence if you want to indicate to your listener that it will be a conditional one. In this way, you can also summarize that Moshi might be a very useful tool to have, and you will be certainly right. However, Moshi is not mandatory. It can be omitted if you desire it so. But Moshi is more frequent with some conditionals than others, and frequent in some situations than others. Moshi appears frequently with the conditional Tara simply because it helps the listener to understand which of the meanings of Tara you will be using, whether it will be if, when, or after. Because when you attach Moshi to Tara, it gives it the meaning of if. So it can be really useful to have and to know, but it is not something that is required to be used. Other than Tara, you can see Moshi appearing with Ba and Nara. Now the third thing is the way that Moshi itself can modify the presented condition. Because when you are using Moshi, the condition itself has a high uncertainty rate, to be more precise, because you are assuming that the condition has very slim chances of coming true. And that is especially useful when you want to when you want to convey a certain hypothetical condition, or when you are talking about the situation that is unreal. And finally, you can attach Moshi in your sentences that are requests in order to give them a more polite and unassuming nuance, or simply because you don't want to be presumptuous about the intent of the listener. So as you can see here, Moshi is really flexible, and that is something that it shares with Tara. On one hand, you have Moshi as a piece that can be used to introduce your sentence as a conditional one, but on the other hand, you also have Moshi modifying your condition to be a condition of, let's say, high uncertainty when it comes to the, let's say, happening of it, to its occurrence. So that is also something that you need to keep in mind. And really, that's all that you need to know about it. So always keep in mind that it is used primarily to introduce your sentences as conditionals, but its usage is not mandatory. It can be dropped. Otsukare-sama deshita, my dear Shokun, and thank you for watching the final episode in my Japanese conditional series, in which I have talked briefly about all of the conditionals and in which I have covered the usage of the adverb moshi, simply because I wanted to hit all of the bases that a beginner will need when studying Japanese conditionals, or for someone who wants to review them. I sincerely hope that you have managed to learn something from my videos, or that I at least was able to answer some of your questions. So once again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in the dojo next time. Sayonara!